Most Overwatch players approach every fight equally, but high-level players understand something different. Sometimes you must lose the fight to win the war. So let's upgrade your game sense by instilling a playmaker's way of looking at the game. An easy to understand but hard to master tactical concept that I used during my in-game meeting days. At its core, this is about strategic sacrifice, prioritizing the bigger tactical picture over the immediate fight in front of you. At the very least, this video should give you a better understanding of when to ult. At best, it should completely change how you evaluate every single fight in a match. Once you understand this concept, you'll start noticing it constantly whenever you watch or play Overwatch. Before we continue, how do we identify whether a fight is important? A fight becomes important because of one or more of these factors: the scoreboard, spawn advantage, key map positions, ult economy. The more of these factors are stacked onto one fight, the more important that fight becomes. Understanding this is what allows a playmaker to manipulate the pace of the game. First of all, let's discuss the interaction between reading the scoreboard and calculating which fights are must-wins for your team. Here, for example, we need to avoid giving the point capture. So, ulting in a 2v3 to extend the fight and turn the tide in a fight the enemy thought they had already won. This gives enough time for my fresh cooldowns respawning teammates to come back and finish off an enemy team that is low on cooldowns. For my team, it felt like 2 fights. For the enemy team, it felt like one long, exhausting fight. Now, take this idea to the next level. Calculate which fights are must-win fights for the opposition versus which fights your team can afford to lose. Look to make the enemy team waste their best ultimates on fights your team can afford to lose, while keeping your strongest ultimates for fights you must win. Sometimes you can even use cheaper or less impactful ultimates simply to bait expensive enemy ult usage. Learning how to manipulate the score in order to tactically increase or decrease the pressure on either team only comes with a full understanding of the scoreboard. Now that we can tactically read the scoreboard, let's consciously improve our micro. Once you know which fights you can afford to lose, early regrouping becomes incredibly powerful. Not only does it feed less ult charge to the enemy team, but it also gives your team another meaningful fight later on. In this D.Va example, the opposition uses key ultimates to succeed in a must-win fight for them, but not a must-win fight for us. Now the next fight becomes important for both teams, except this time you have your ultimate, your key cooldowns, and your team's advanced spawn ready to go. The opposition, in comparison, used up key elements of their ult economy and are split up between map control and pushing the payload. Applying this idea properly can massively improve your defense. The attackers first have to remove the defender's initial map control, then solidify their own control over the point, while managing the number of teammates that survived and their cooldown rotation. The defenders, meanwhile, can often recontest the second or third tick with new cooldowns from freshly respawned teammates, usually without the need to retake map control. The problem for the defense is setting up plus executing a retake under a tighter time limit and before the attack gets reinforcements. Anyone on defense can contest that third tick while teammates regroup. As long as they, and this is very important, do not die or stagger. Smartly touching point alleviates pressure from your tank. It gives your tank a small window to engage, while fewer enemy eyes and cooldowns are focused on them. The attackers are under far more pressure. They must win during that push because they do not get a retake opportunity. They are also mid cooldown rotation, so they either need to snowball the defense or exploit a mistake quickly. Let's move on to applying this concept to the different game modes and discuss the nuances that truly make a difference. On control maps, there are usually no ultimates available during the initial exchange. That means teams should fight hard to be the first to capture the point. Winning that first capture gives your team map control, a slight ult advantage, and momentum that can easily snowball into a second fight win. You can quickly find yourself sitting at 50% or higher. And if you lose that first fight, delay the point capture for as long as possible. The capture percentage creates pressure that constantly builds on the losing team. Now, when you approach that 99% win, you have a decision to make. Depending on the ult economy, do you allow the enemy team to throw everything to what they view as a must-win fight, then win the next fight against a team with little resources left? Or do you aggressively ult early and deny them the chance to even touch point? Both options have risks. Both have situations where they are correct. And if it becomes a must-win fight for both teams, then it becomes all about calculating win conditions. Either winning before the enemy executes theirs, or survive long enough to absorb the enemy's aggressive resource dump before turning the fight yourself. Flashpoint follows a very similar frame of thought to Control. You are balancing capture percentages across multiple points while constantly evaluating which fights your team can afford to lose and which fights the enemy team must absolutely win. On push maps, instead of percentage pressure, think of pressure as map distance. Ask yourself, how many fights can happen within this stretch of land? Understanding spawn advantage alongside the concepts we discussed earlier helps you calculate which fights are must-wins and which fights are acceptable losses. This is why squeezing out one extra fight to maintain an advanced spawn can be hugely impactful. Escort maps are usually about controlling 3 major corners or map areas. The key interaction becomes understanding which map areas favor your team composition, while also recognizing which fights are must-win fights. Strong teams constantly try to force fights in areas where they hold an inherent advantage. This idea, combined with early resets and recontests, is what either breaks or stabilizes a defense. This means that a successful team looks to fight as often as possible in areas that their team composition excels in. And in this example, we use high grounds that the enemy team cannot easily access, allowing us to constantly pressure the slower enemy team comp. And the absolute best moment to recontest is actually the intersection of two moments. When your team is ready to engage, and that brief moment of doubt when the enemy team starts wondering if a retouch is even coming. That intersection is perfect for a recontest. Hybrid is tactically a combination of all the previous modes. The first capture point functions like a lightweight version of control. Instead of fighting over percentages across a long period of time, teams fight over 3 capture ticks. A full capture happens surprisingly quickly, roughly 32 seconds with one player or around 17 seconds with 3. That means the recontest window usually happens on the third and final tick. After the capture point, the payload section follows the same ideas as escort. And once we understand which fights matter most, the next step is understanding where those fights should happen. Understanding which map areas are worth contesting comes down to recognizing which map corners favor your team composition over the enemy's. For an individual player, sometimes you can win a fight before it even properly starts with a cheeky initiating ultimate. Knowing which corners are worth fighting for means understanding where the fight should be happening in the first place. A well-placed initiating ultimate can immediately give your team the advantage and force the enemy team to react to your tempo instead of setting their own. Now, admittedly, this part is highly situational. Recognizing those situations come with experience, map knowledge, and understanding team compositions. Now let's focus on how an individual player can tactically help their team control key map areas. The biggest factor is smart positioning. Simply understanding the importance of an upcoming fight should influence where you position before it even starts. If you apply the previous concepts from this video correctly, you can enter that key fight with your ultimate ready, your cooldowns ready, and a pre-planned strong position already established. That means you do not need to waste resources taking map control during the fight itself. Your team can spend those resources actually winning the fight instead. And if the enemy team uses aggression to push you backwards, you can deliberately give ground while draining their resources, as your resources gets refreshed by new spawns, until you finally reach the key map corner where your team must contest. In this example, the enemy used resources to take an area that was not important enough. We come back with fresh cooldowns to fight for a corner that is important and worth using our key ults for. Lose the fight, win the war. Attackers usually need more aggressive and creative ultimates to break map control away from defenders. Defenders, meanwhile, need more efficient ultimates because they are already playing with map advantage. So at the highest level, this overarching playmaking concept becomes forcing both teams to invest resources around the map areas that matter most. Let's conclude by quickly exploring a few common issues. One of the biggest mistakes is not having enough players pushing payload during important moments or around critical corners. Sometimes the payload moving quickly past a defender's advantageous map area is more important than maintaining map control itself. We also discussed how aggressively ulting near a 99% win can be risky because the enemy team will likely have a large ult advantage in what they view as a must-win fight. That strategy can still work, especially if your team can combine aggressive map control with a guaranteed fight win ult combo, but it remains a risky way to offset the enemy's ult advantage. Another common mistake is not fighting hard enough for the very first capture. Giving the enemy team too much early percentage creates enormous pressure later on. Even if the enemy team establishes aggressive map control, your team still needs to minimize how much percentage gets given up early. That might mean quickly overwhelming an isolated enemy with a temporary number advantage, or having a DPS briefly contest a point until the tank can anchor it properly. Ideally, you want the fight decided before the enemy reaches a first capture of 15%. Now, of course, this comes with a caveat. Avoid using ultimates too early. You still want your defenders fighting together as a unit rather than splitting up between point capture and aggressive map control. Make sure everybody is on the same page, even if that means taking the fight directly on point. The topic of common mistakes honestly deserves its own video entirely, so if that's something you'd like to see, let me know. I don't like my cooldown advantage here. Are you okay up there, dude? And once you start seeing Overwatch through this lens, matches stop feeling random. You begin recognizing which fights actually matter, and more importantly, how to shape them before they even begin. Alright, we need to reposition, guys. Recontest, I should say. I got a bomb. Do you have EMP? If we can EMP bomb. Can we EMP bomb? He's dead. He's still dead. Well, I'm gonna touch payload slowly. Don't show them that I'm here. He's low. Good retouch, guys. Good retouch. Very good retouch. We keep EMP bomb for the next fight, which is huge.